That's what I'm talking about. Let's go. Let's get this energy up, peeps. So, my name is Kelvin DeVoe, and I have the absolute pleasure of bringing up this next brother who's going to give us some things that could shape our ways of thinking and our business. So, because, if you're here, you saw something in this particular session, in the title of this session, that you feel like that you can use for your business, your career, your track. So this business and branding track is sponsored by AT&T Small Business. This session is what brands and marketers can learn from Verzuz by Nicholas Love, agency principal with the Kulur Group. Did I say that correctly, Nicholas? Kulur Group. Sorry about that. So this session is the agency is Nicholas Love, agency principal with the Kulur Group. Give Nicholas a round of applause as he heads onto the stage. Peeps, let's give it up.
Testing. Can everybody hear me? All right, cool. Good morning, everybody. Hope all is well. Nicholas Love, agency principal with the Kulur Group. This is crazy. This is my first time speaking in real life in front of real people in about 3 years. So certainly shout out to Michelle and the org for this opportunity. So we're the Kulur Group, a challenger brand agency. And if you're not familiar with that, we'll talk a little bit about what challenger brands are, what are some of the characteristics, because certainly Verzuz represents a lot of foundational characteristics and tendencies of a challenger brand. We operate across the B2B and B2C landscape, offering services like brand and purpose, creative, digital and social, market research, and performance marketing as well. A little bit about myself. Two-time graduate of the Grambling State University. Formerly VP of Global Marketing with Hotwire Global, built a digital center of excellence with GNS Business Communications. I actually got my first start as a former on-air talent within ESPN's digital media department, right? So certainly I've been at the forefront for over, I'm about to age myself, but over 16 years in terms of how the digital media landscape was evolving. And certainly this topic of Verzuz is very, very interesting in that respect of correlations. Made a lot of appearances and spoke at a lot of various conferences. But considering that we said, this is marketing for the culture, I thought it was important to kind of get real very quickly, okay? And there's two types of ways, right, that, if you're familiar with the theory of situational awareness, right, in terms of how you communicate, how you behave based on the environments that you're in. I'm gonna define culture two different ways, right? Now, certainly, if you watch the Jeezy Gucci Man Verzuz, that was something very, very interesting, right? But there was something that he said that I thought was very, very important. And I quote, "When I said I wanted to do this shit for the culture, that's what I wanted to do. I brought you here to show you the world cares about what the fuck we got going on, because we are the culture." Well, I think it's important to really kind of take a step back and really ask the fundamental question. What does culture mean? What does culture mean? Well, I would say that culture is an action that instinctively forces people to change how they think or how they behave. Let me say it again. How they think or how they behave. Let's talk about, oh man, hold on, audio. Where's my man with the audio? I'll come back to this video later on. Oh, here we go. Sorry.
Quarantine music fans getting the treat of a lifetime.
They're calling it the Verzuz effect.
Hundreds of thousands of people are tuning in.
That's Madison Square Garden, 3 times over.
The response was incredible.
Like after this was over, my numbers went up crazy.
All of the artists' catalogs been going up 100%.
Babyface and Teddy Riley's songs double in streams.
They crashed the internet.
Instagram made an announcement.
They crashed IG.
It's the biggest event.
Monday Night Verzuz was the most incredible night of my life.
A lot of people call it battles. We're battling enough in the world today. So let's flip it around and celebrate each other by playing amazing songs that change the world.
Great news here is you're actually going to keep it going. So who else are we going to see?
So I thought it was important, right, to kind of go back and really just kind of give a broader overview of what Verzuz was, right? But let's kind of go back to 2020. Certainly there have been ongoing Verzuz since then, but I thought 2020 is really important as you think about 3-year lifts, right, in terms of core marketing principles. 22 battles, 30 plus million estimated views, nearly 300 billion impressions, right under 5 million mentions and right under 5 million posts. And the caveat here is that net-based, if you're really into social listening, Facebook doesn't play well with people. So, some of that data is certainly skewed based on the limitations of the respective tool. But if we're to think about Verzuz under core principles, I think for me, it kind of comes to 2 foundational elements, right? Iconic brand and challenger brand. Now, if you think about what iconic brands are, iconic brands certainly help to solve myths, right? You think about some of the more popular iconic brands, Nike, right? It's telling a story of this idea of just doing it, which is really rooted in inspiration, right? You think about Person as an iconic brand, Michael Jordan. Now, depending on if you're a LeBron fan or a Jordan fan, that's another conversation for a different day, right? But if you think about the commercials that were produced in the early 90s, right, it was all about Be Like Mike. And Be Like Mike represented excellence, right? And so for me, and let's define what iconic brands, right? They're a cultural phenomenon that influences loyalty in their customers or fans, as well as establishing an emotional attachment that resonates through their respective lives. Now, a challenger brand, for me, represents a mindset, right? That you have business convictions that are outside of traditional resources to bring change to an existing industry. Now, there are all types of ways to describe a challenger brand, right? From innovative to demonstrating next generation thinking, right? But an effective experience with a challenger brand brings about an emotion and memories that last a lifetime, okay? Now, as marketers in here, one of your greatest challenges is this idea of friction. Friction. Now, there are 2 core elements, in my opinion, that kind of comes to friction. There's what's called macro friction, which really sits at the industry or category level, right? And it's really the gap between how things are and how they should be, right, within that particular category. Micro friction, for example, sits at the brand level, right? It's the gap between how things are and how that particular brand needs to improve how their products or their services are actually sold. So forgive me, because I'm a take a page out of Freddie Haynes' notebook, who's a prominent pastor in Dallas and actually used his cell phone for his respective notes during this presentation, right? But I think it's important that if we sit back and we look at how Verzuz rose up within the macro-micro mindset, let's go back. Well, let's not go back to the pandemic, but let's remember some of the challenges that we were facing. Movies stopped filming. Production stopped, right? Entertainment was really stressed. Sporting events were being canceled, right? Outside of the bubble. And so there was a lot of anxiety that was happening across the world. Well, when you think about why brands or people exist on social media, they typically exist for 4 fundamental reasons: to inform or be informed, to educate or be educated, to entertain or be entertained, or to build relationships, right? What Timberland and Swiss Beats did, even if they didn't set out to do this, right, was that they brought a macro and a micro friction approach, right, which was entertainment was stressed, right? And if you think about the importance of music, music helps us from a well-being perspective, right? From a connectivity perspective, right? These are all persona traits and characteristics that when you are setting out in your marketing campaign to actually deploy reasons why people need to consume your products, you need to understand these fundamental characteristics. You need to understand these motives, right? Or these triggers that you can actually tap into. And so what it did was it formed a community. In exchange, it represented, various elements of how marketing has changed and quite frankly will continue to change. The marketing of yesterday, right, thought that content is king. Well, in today's creator economy, content is merely a commodity. Many of you all have cell phones in here that have camera capabilities, right, that allows you to kind of produce content at the drop of a dime, okay? And what that means is that, you have a lot of people talking about content marketing, you have a lot of people talking about thought leadership. In reality, some of the thought leadership is fluff, right? It's not real thought leadership. It's not taking an authoritative position to ultimately challenge, conventional thinking. It's just content. And so, when you think about commodities, right, these are things that are being produced at scale, but for cheap, right? And so I think it's really important that we start to kind of challenge the notion that content is king. It's still important, don't get me wrong, right? But it's not the most important thing, if you will. The marketing of yesterday thought that the creative associated with content was most important. But if we've learned anything about Verzuz, it's really that experience drives recall and loyalty. If you think about how competitive the internet, the digital space is, from the social media news feeds to search engine results pages to your email inbox, right? You are not short of content that is in front of you, okay? But your experience, what that content does to you in terms of either informing, educating, entertaining, those three things ultimately build a relationship, right, that you remember who or what that brand was, what they stood for, what they were offering, and certainly they stay top of mind. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about the differences between mindshare and market share later on, but those are core elements that sit there. The marketing of yesterday, standardized metrics, right, but little data. I mean, right now, there's an overabundance of data. And I think it's really critical that you're asking the right questions to kind of focus on what type of data points you want to be able to extract. Market share, which is typically defined by sales, right? But the marketing of today celebrates both market share and mind share. I'll talk a little bit about mind share later on. Marketing of yesterday, we use data to measure how we perform. Now, data allows us to predict what our audiences desire, right? If you're not tapping into this, and I'm talking about things outside of just, Google Analytics and things, right? Like if you are not tapping into intent data or social listening or things of this nature, right? You're basically producing content blindly, right? And hoping and praying, right, that this hits. Well, listen, in the world of marketing, hope is not a strategy. It's not a strategy. It's not a sustainable strategy, right? And then the marketing of yesterday, paid media drives reputation at scale, right? A recent survey kind of came out that, organizations, they talk philosophically, right, about this idea that, okay, well, we know what our customers want and we're going to deliver content that our customers mostly care about. But if you really kind of took a step back and actually performed an audit, most of the content that these organizations that quote unquote say that they know what their audiences are most interested in, the content is self-serving. It's self-serving. But today, we recognize the importance of community and the impact that community has on three basic, important marketing principles, which is reputation, relationship, and revenue. Reputation, relationship, and revenue, most commonly associated with account-based marketing. However, it's important regardless of what marketing discipline you're most focused in. So let's talk about some of the low-hanging fruit from Verzuz, right? And one of the things that I really like about Verzuz is content serialization, right? Well, what is content serialization? Well, it's this idea of taking a singular concept, right, and turning it into an installment. So you're developing a series based on a singular idea, okay? Through content serialization, content marketers can capture the hearts and attentions of their respective audiences, right, and ultimately build anticipation for their respective content. Now later on, you're going to hear about Facebook ads, right, and These platforms, their ad capabilities, their ad sophistication have continued to evolve. And so how do you match, content serialization with a sophisticated advertising approach? Well, I don't know how many of you know, right, with Facebook or other platforms, have the ability to be able to re-engage or retarget you based on the volume of content that you've consumed within a particular video. You can categorize it by if a user has consumed 25% of that video, 50% of that video, 75% of that video. Those 3 data points, right, will indicate an affinity, right, for how well your content is resonating with them, right, to ultimately go beyond awareness, but to ultimately deepen consideration and advocacy, right, for the content that you're creating, okay? This is why content serialization is important. Because in the same way that you think about customer journeys and things of that nature, right, you want to be able to kind of move them through a desired pathway, okay? Good is good, but great is better, right? The value of content marketing is rooted in the experience. The experience that happens between the customer and and a company. Good content creates an interaction, a like, a share, a retweet. But early on, I talked about, right, we are in the content creation economy, right? Quite frankly, some of us might be experiencing content fatigue on various platforms, which is why you've seen the rise of Discord, why you see these communities within Slack kind of picking up in these particular subgroups, right? Because I want to be able to self-select and self-identify the type of content that I want to be exposed to, when I want to be exposed to, how I want to be exposed to. Customization, personalization, everybody, but we'll talk a little bit of that. That's a different presentation. But for me, great content drives recall and allows the consumer to see a solution through the interaction with that piece of content. They rush me, well, they not rush me, but I kind of I park parenthetically on something. So 3 gems, right? One, make your content valuable, understand what your audiences care about. 2, segment your value, right? Develop a plan that brings both breadth and depth across your content journey. And 3, drive creativity, right? Continuously drive innovation in your how and in your why. Second element, listen, pivot, and provide, right? Now there's a big debate on whether or not people control their brand image. Well, let me answer that today. You don't. Your brand image is not what's said by you, but is the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that users experience when interacting with you, right? The one way that you can influence with your brand image is by creating content that their company or their respective clients in a digital space that's relevant and resonating, that creates a slow scroll experience and acquires mind share, okay? Mind share relates to consumer awareness of a product or a company. Marketers aim to create such popularity around the brand so that you're top of mind when they're looking to make a decision, right? A lot of people have historically focused on market share. You can't have market share unless you have mind share. Let me say that again. You can't have market share unless you have mind share. So let's drill a little deeper into the 4 R's of mind share. Reputation, recognition, resonance, relevance. Reputation is the perception that audiences have of a brand. Recognition is the level of awareness of your products or services in the marketplace. Resonance, the ability of your brand experience to break through clutter, deliver your messages to target audience, to change attitudes or opinions. Last but not least, relevance, how closely a brand experience matches the interest of a target audience. So earlier I talked a little bit about there's an overabundance of data, right? And so for me, I think it's important to really evaluate and audit the type of questions that you're asking, right? As you're starting to develop performance reports, as you're starting to develop campaign strategy, right? And so I'm not going to go through all of these questions, right? But just keep in mind, as you're thinking about campaign planning, you want to be able to ask the right question to be able to provide the right solution to that question, as opposed to providing the right solution to the wrong question, okay? So within the lens of Verzuz, right, we'll talk a little bit about how, companies or entities want to influence the influencers, right, through this lens of advocacy. Well, Gabrielle Union is typically charging hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars to post things from a social media perspective. This was organic, right? Now, whether or not she's going 50-50 with Dwayne Wade, that's another conversation for another day, right? But this was organic because she had an affinity and an affection, right, for the Verzuz movement, okay? One of the fundamental questions, what are key audiences saying about the brand? Well, in the E40 Too Short battle, she was very excited, right? Thus, elevating and scaling awareness to an audience that Timbaland and Swiss Beats may not necessarily instinctively had on social media, again, to promote the actual event. Or let's talk about resonance, right? Our audience is willing to advocate for and share the brand. Another example of ESPN jumping in on the E40 Too Short battle, right, and really bringing it into their core audiences, right, with Marshawn Lynch, who represents the Bay all day, every day, right? Last but not least, when would brand experience at each touch point, right? So, listen, Verzuz started with a very humble beginning. Very humble, okay? It started on Instagram with a conversation between Timbaland and Swiss Beats, just really talking shit about who had the dopest hits, right? And the next thing you know, it scales to YouTube. Then Earned Media picks it up, right? Where Billboard and the New York Times or USA Today or CNN starts actually scoring the events, right? Conversations started to pick up on Clubhouse. Snapchat started to have specific categories. Like any good concept, innovation comes to the forefront, right? So people like Erykah Badu, shout out to Grambling, started to have after parties on their respective websites, right, where they could actually buy merchandise if you watch the Erykah Badu Jill Scott battle. Verzuz Radio picked up, right, so that people could actually have some type of AI experience, right, bringing in the respective songs of their favorite artists to curate during the challenges that COVID was bringing to us. People made it a date night, right, in terms of bringing it on Apple TV. Twitter conversations were buzzing. Facebook is the granddaddy of them all, right, in terms of how conversations were forming. All of this started in a very humble concept. If you look at the sentiment of Verzuz, right, mostly positive, right? Now, there were some complaints about, technical difficulty, shout out to Teddy Riley, or battles not necessarily starting on time, right? I mean, that's a different conversation, but very positive. How have artists benefited from Verzuz? I'm trying to go through because I know I got a few minutes left. But Jadakiss streaming jumped an average of 88% in the 3 days following his legendary performance, according to Alpha Data, okay? Well, Gladys Knight, for example, saw a 252% increase. Patti LaBelle saw a 219% lift. Verzuz demonstrated the ability for artists to connect with different generations, right? Instagram, for example, had not necessarily been known as a demographic that was generating a substantial amount of activity from the 50 to 65 age demographic. But when you see these types of things, right, now you're bringing a different audience to that platform. When you see the connectivity in terms of the increase from a streaming perspective, now you're scaling, right, the generational pool that these respective artists have. What Verzuz really did was really redefine the importance of access, okay? Users did not go to Instagram for high production value-based content, right? Users went to Instagram with the intent to get authentic access, to ultimately build relationships and form a direct connection with entities providing value. Certainly, as a really valuable takeaway, brands that rise to the top of the competition are the ones that truly understand what their customers want and make getting access to it simple, okay? Reducing the micro friction that I talked a little bit about earlier. And then digital changed what access meant, right? Access to cultures, celebrities, and moments likely to be inseparable during this moment. Because of the content creation economy that we live in, you might forget what you've tweeted, but you'll never forget how the experience makes you feel. Thank you. Any questions? Sure.